Mr. Santiago Fisas, the head of the European Union Observer Group here in Nigeria for the 2015 election. Well, I'm now being joined from Akure, the capital of Ondo State, by one of the observers in Nigeria who monitored the presidential election on the March 28th and, of course, the April 11th governorship in the House of Assembly election. Abiodun Ajijola joins us via Skype from Akure. Thank you for joining us, Abiodun. Tell me, from your group's point of view and what some of your colleagues have seen so far in this election, we had about slightly over 43% voter turnout in the presidential election. Tell me about the turnout here and what you make of the 2015 general election put together.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. First of all, the 2015 elections needs to be looked at maybe from 2 points of view, the presidential and the governorship election. If you look at the presidential election, in a lot of cases you could see that it had a little bit more excitement and energy, and therefore more people could be seen to have turned out in several places. Whereas in a lot of places in the governorship elections, you didn't see as many people come out as you did in the presidential. But overall, 2011, we had a voter turnout across nation on average of 53%, whereas in 2011, it had dropped in the presidential election to about 47.1 thereabouts. This is about 6% drop. Now, that's not too healthy because we would hope that there will be more people interested in the electoral process 2015 than 2011. But clearly from the figures of the voter turnout, it seems as if fewer people actually came out, even though there was great excitement with this election. Also, you look at the total number of voters that actually were registered. We had over 67 million voters actually registered, whereas in 2011 we had 73.5 million voters registered, which is significantly higher than 2011, although the voters registered did undergo certain processes in INEC to clean it out of double registration and AFIS and other things like that. So from those two things, you can see that the enthusiasm, though it seems so much higher, on paper, you see that actually the voter turnout and all that is not as high. But one good thing that we did see is the rejected votes. When you look at the volume of rejected votes in 2011 as compared to 2015, you see that there is quite a significant improvement. And rejected votes, as you know, are voided votes which cannot be used and cannot be counted as ballots casted. So you have 3.19% in 2011 as the volume of rejected votes, whereas in 2015 it reduced to 2.6%. What that means from pure calculation is a 0.59% reduction, which means that fewer people are getting it wrong, which means more people are getting it right. So we had fewer people coming out both in the real term and in the percentage term, but we also had fewer ballots being voided, which also hopefully means that there's an improvement in the approach that the voters have to casting their ballots.
Tell me again, it gives a lot of us concerns, the reasons why. You talk about enthusiasm of Nigerian voters before the elections, and unfortunately that didn't turn out, it didn't come as in terms of the way they came out to vote. What could be the reasons why more Nigerians didn't come out? We had a potential of close to 60 million voters for these elections, but unfortunately less than half of that were the people who turned out in the election. What is the reason?
Well, you see, this is what my theory is. When you look at the figures that are given to us in terms of the election results that are declared in the various collation centers, this is what we can work with. What is given to us in 2011, this is what is given now. But we all know that this is the most keenly and hotly contested election that we've had ever, even more so than 2011. So it makes it strange that why is the voter turnout less by about 6%, but mathematically we can't say much because we must work with INEC released figures. But this is my theory. You see, in 2011, the accreditation was manual. And what that meant was that there was room for a lot of manipulations, as we have seen that manual accreditation opens room for aggressive and massive rigging where, people are desperate to go to that extent. But the card reader introduction, what it did was to ensure that you can't cast more ballots than those accredited, and those accredited are restricted to those that come to the polling booth. No other person can be accredited using the card reader. So what this ultimately means is that you cannot have those bogus figures, and those bogus figures must be trimmed down to work in line with the card reader. So what I think is that in 2011-15, we're actually working with a more real figure. This is what I think, a more real figure that looks more likely like what actually happened. But in 2011, probably the figures are not as real as they should have been, because as we have all seen, even from the 2015 elections in some cases, once manual accreditation is permitted, it opens the floodgate for all manner of things. So I think the card reader has actually tremendously reduced the number of those ballots that can be stuffed, or the extent to which you can stuff a ballot, which is giving us a more real election result, as opposed to 2011, where manual accreditation was allowed. I think that is actually what is really contributing to this shift. Because if you see the enthusiasm of the people in this, voters and international community, local community for this election, is clear that there was a lot of attention on it. So it doesn't make sense that the voter turnout is less. But I think that the vote card reader is probably responsible for that. In a good way.
Tell me about the issue of the card reader. There's some creation of INEC in this election. The permanent voter cards was one, and the also is a card reader, the smart card readers. Tell me, do you think INEC really got it right, and what perhaps would they have done better to make these two creations work better if they are probably had prepared earlier?
Thank you. The card reader is a very wonderful innovation, and I think we should carry it along in the future when we conduct elections in Nigeria. But this is the challenge that I think. I know the card reader is something that had been in the pipeline for over 2 years. Personally, I am aware that there had been discussions about card reader long before now. It wasn't something that started 6 months ago. So what I think was a critical error on the part of INEC was in the area of Ekiti and Osun. These were clear elections where pressure was even mounted to use the card readers in these elections. Had that been done, many of the challenges that later occurred in the large-scale election of the presidential election would have not occurred, or even if they had occurred, they could have been able to find out what to do about them and nip them in the bud. So I think that's one of the errors concerning the card reader, not testing it on time, which there was ample opportunity to test it. But that being said, I would say that the card reader has performed well. But another thing, again, with the card reader that I think, we have to recognize is the fact that if it had been properly, it had been used widespread, and people had the ability to, like, for example, I was in a particular polling booth in Dutse, Makaranta area of Abuja, and I remember that a particular person bought a hand sanitizer, and every single person on that in that polling unit was able to get accredited without a rejection of a single fingerprint. Whereas a neighboring polling unit in the same school complex was having a huge number of rejections. So a simple thing like using the hand sanitizer in that polling unit allowed seamless, quick accreditation. And that could have been discovered if more time had been allowed to deploy it. Because in science, you would first try something on a small scale before you implement it on a larger scale.
Abiodun, quickly, just a moment, let me come in here, sorry. Tell me about the issue of electronic voting. We've introduced some form of technology into our elections. Do you see us going into electronic voting in the nearest future, say in 2019?
Well, electronic voting would be a good step forward. Obviously, accreditation has shown, electronic accreditation or PVC card reader has shown that, look, technology is good and technology works. But for me, in order to be sure the impact or how well technology will serve us in voting, in the actual voting process, apart from the legal issues of getting the National Assembly to amend that to allow us to do electoral voting, electronic voting, I would say that we must begin to test run. We have about 7 governorship elections slated between now and 2015. We'll have Kogi, we'll have Bayelsa, Ondo, Edo, Ekiti, Osun. So if we want to attempt this and we are able to get the amendments, the proper legal amendments, then we need to test run it. waiting till 2019 to run it for the first time would be a very big mistake.
All right.
And I think it's a good idea that we have to test run it.
All right, great. Quickly tell me about some of the other figures that we do not know. I understand that you have been working day and night to put these figures together. There are about 6 or 7 states where elections didn't hold, and we had inconclusive elections. I mean, governorship elections on the April 11th, and we had inconclusive elections in Anambra, Imo State, Nasarawa State, and of course Abia State. Tell us some of these other figures that you have put together that will give us a sense of exactly what we can make of the 2015 elections.
Yes, thank you for talking about the inconclusive elections. Specifically for in the area of the governorship elections, we have Abia, Imo, and Taraba. And as you know, that the challenge with an inconclusive election is where you have much larger number of people that couldn't vote, vis-a-vis the difference between the winner and the person coming first and the runner-up. And this is why you must have a supplementary election to be able to determine a winner. You can see that from the figures already, you begin to sense that, you know, it's funny. If, for example, you look at a place like Imo State, you have about 79,000 gap between the first place and the second place, and you have just about 140,000 registered voters. Now, if you take just the average voter turnout that we've been having across the nation, it's about over 40-something%. You would see that technically, on that merit alone, it's difficult to make a ground, but because the election must be held to ensure that these people are able to vote, that must be done. But other areas that we need to compare the 2011 and 2015, if we look at the presidential results, which is something quite interesting, you can see some of the differences between the two leading candidates or parties. For example, between the PDP and the APC. Now, in 2011, the PDP candidate was able to score about 22,925,275 votes, whereas the APC candidate was able to only score about 12,395,774. Now, 2015, what actually happened was that the PDP candidate dropped significantly, only was able to get 43.93% of what he got in 2011, which gave him a total of just 12,853,000 and thereabouts. Whereas the APC candidate was able to increase what he got by about 24.43%, which is about got him 15,424,000 thereabouts. So what actually happened was that the contest was basically where one candidate lost significant votes that he got in the last election, where another candidate obtained significant votes. And that actually made the critical difference between the two elections. Like I said earlier, in the area of registered voters, we had much lower registered voters. But I think that this is partially because the register has been cleaned, all right? Whereas in 2015, 11, the register had not been cleaned. And after cleaning, 10 million names were removed, which dropped us down to about 60 million votes.
All right. Thank you so much, Abiodun Ajijola, for talking to us on Politics Today tonight. Abiodun Ajijola is of the Election Monitor and Observer Group, which monitor the election. Thank you so much for joining us.